to be human is to realize the fullness of what it is to be human, physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual, and live and breathe in that way.
I'm your host, Sha Hurley. Each week, I invite a conscious leader in tech, sales, and beyond to share their inner journey, how they overcome obstacles, how they achieve success while staying true to themselves, and above all, what makes them human beings. I hope those authentic conversations serve as an inspiration for you as you continue your own inner journey of self-discovery, healing, and mastery. Hi, Tom. Welcome to the show. I'm super excited to have you because I know there's a lot you can share with myself and the audience, and there's a lot we can learn from you and your inner journey. Before we dive right in, I would love to have you maybe start to introduce your journey, not in the traditional way, but like from years ago where I remember you're in banking and then you're a producer at some point and you're meditating. Now you're helping conscious leaders. I see this journey from my point of view, but would love to maybe have you introduce yourself in a way that adds a little bit color to it. When I say color, that means like, the time when you were in it, what's your definition of success at that point on a high level?
Yeah, it's a great question. Success is something that will be determined by the state of consciousness that's experiencing the success and the desire for that level of success. And, as a young 19-year-old, I had a dream that I would become a journalist writing for Time magazine, writing about the evils of capitalistic greed. And I was going to do a journalism degree at university to fulfill that desire and become a journalist. And I had some time to fill in. I've been backpacking around the world after school. I took a year off between high school and university. And in that time, I blew all my money. And I came back and had to get a job. So I applied for a bunch of jobs in the paper. But my idea of success at that point was to be a journalist and write these phenomenal articles in, big magazines. But I landed a job on a trading room floor as a broker. And I was only going to do that for a little while. But in the end, I got so caught up in the idea of the success of that world. And that world left a very big imprint and impression on me. And so my idea of success changed very quickly, which showed how easily adaptable and malleable I was and influenced I was. And so success then became an idea about how to make lots of money. And I was caught up in a collective mindset that that's what success was. Expensive cars, nice houses, and lots of money. And I, by definition, became very successful in that space. But as life went on, and I was in that career for quite a long time, but eventually that led me to abject misery and panic attacks, depression, anxiety, even to the point of questioning whether I wanted to live my life anymore. Eventually led to a full-blown nervous breakdown at the age of 29, where I was so far from what I look back on now as my dharma, my path that I was supposed to be living. So success was misguided. The idea of that success was misguided. In Sanskrit, we call it pragyaparada, a mistake of the intellect. And I found meditation in that time as a tool to help me get through that. And that is where I started to explore deeply into spirituality, Eastern philosophy, the Vedas, and mindset, the mind, stress, the impact it has on us. And that eventually led me to, many years later, become a meditation teacher and a film producer, producing a film about the power of crisis and how crisis is a mechanism and an evolutionary force to guide us to awakening, to self-realization, to becoming more conscious, more aware. And that we can see that as something we're a victim of or something that is empowering us. And so success for me now is all about how deeply can I be self-realized? How deeply can I become the clear embodiment of divine loving awareness, and how much can I inspire and support others in that journey as well. So it's kind of like a twofold process for me now. What success is, one is my own personal success, being the full version of that divine essence, and how well can I support others along the way to help them alleviate suffering and become self-realized as well.
As you're just talking, I got chills in my body. This reminds me of the documentary I watched. I don't know if you watch this one. The name is called Becoming Nobody, Randas. So it's a whole process of like how we just nerd about this one definition of success according to the society, according to our parents, according to different kind of, whoever. And then we kind of get on the track and make a lot of money and then realize, hey, I want something else. And then started to kind of climb on the second mountain. We got on the first mountain unconsciously. We do things that we don't even know why. And then at some point we started to climb the second mountain. And Now, I'm curious, you mentioned about Dharma. What's your definition of Dharma? And how did you come to where you are today? Because I think this is such a relevant topic. A lot of people are so depressed right now, given what's going on, the layoff in tech, in AI, disrupting the job market, and a lot of things going on. So I'm curious about your definition on Dharma, and then maybe to help audience to understand about how you get there as well as an inspiration.
Yeah, Dharma, it can be interpreted in many ways, and it's subjective sharing that I'm going to give you now from my own personal interpretation of it. Dharma, in my mind, is considered life purpose, the purpose of life. And many people ask that question, why? Why am I here? What's this all about? And of course, the traditional code in our society is that what life is about, and your purpose is to get a good degree, get a good job, get a good mortgage and a good house and a good wife or a good husband and good kids, and pay off the house and pay off the mortgage and, have a holiday and retire. But what I see life purpose and the purpose of life is, firstly, it's 2 steps. One is step 1, to realize your true nature, not the indoctrinated mind, not the sensations or emotions in the body, not the physical form, but the subtle aspect of reality. Divine presence, being, spirit, source, soul, whatever you want to call it, that subtle layer of reality that's non-form. And then the second, that's step 1. And step 2 is to express that in the world in a way that is the true expression, whether it's through an art form, whether it's through a book, whether it's through a podcast, or whether it's through coaching or constructing houses, but in some way, shape or form where we contribute back to the world through that realized person, that realized vessel, in a way that elevates and supports the uplift of the planet in some way, shape or form. There's some really beautiful terminology being given to this now. In the past, in Sanskrit, it was called Sat Yuga and Kali Yuga, Kali Yuga being the age of ignorance and Sat Yuga being the age of enlightenment. And we're moving into Sat Yuga, but there's a really beautiful contemporization of that language called Game A and Game B. And so we're in Game A at the moment, which is a win-lose paradigm, and it's a terminating game. But we have that potential, and we're seeing early stages of gradual shift into Game B, which is a game that's played, which is a win-win game, a game that everyone that's playing that game is supporting the collective in some way, shape or form, because they realize through the first stage of the journey in their Dharma that they are the collective, they are the unified field. And as the unified field, you by default want to create things that in some way, shape or form support and elevate the collective, because you are the collective. And so it's just a natural tendency to go out into action from that space.
Wow. There's just a lot of rich information there. Literally yesterday, my friend and I are just talking about this path from karma to dharma. I mean, just wanted to hear your own experiences, right? You were in banking and now you are on your dharma, the path. Thinking about the transition that you went through, like what stopped you from getting on the path of dharma? Because I do remember our last conversation, I asked you, how long did it take for you to get to where you are? And you said, clearly remember you said it took longer than you wanted to make that transition. So what stopped you from taking that quick action to get on the path of dharma?
What takes us away from that path of dharma, which let's just call it the life in flow. It's the path you're naturally born to walk. When we're on dharma, like you said, from karma to dharma, when we're on dharma, there's a lot less karma, which is this negative, or not always negative, but negative and positive cause and effect. But when in the early stages prior to me being on this particular path, and really we're always on the path ultimately, even though it might not seem like it, because sometimes we have to go through chaotic experiences and make really bad choices, which is still part of you being on the path. So we're never really not on the path ultimately. It's just that we can be misguided, and that's when we have lots of karma. And karma is a mechanism within the universe, a beautiful guiding, caring force of intelligence that is trying to redirect us back into dharma. So the two come very well connected and a part of the long macro perspective of dharma anyway. You can't actually get off your path. You can just be seemingly off your path, but that's still part of your path. Okay. And it just means that there's more disruption, more chaos, more discomfort, which is just the intelligent design trying to nourish you and guide you and support you into getting back into your orbit. And so what takes us off that or prevents us from going onto that path at times really is just that there's just a lot of ego, or we call it the occupant or the ego or the identity, the personality. And that personality lives with huge amounts of fallibility and sense of lack. And so that sense of lack is trying to always be fulfilled through most immediate and most obvious outlets that it can actually find it. So that might be buying a new dress or taking some drugs or gambling in a casino or, being addicted to Instagram. These are all ways for the ego to try and satiate itself, to try and find fulfillment. And all egos are constantly trying to find fulfillment. Whereas the divine's not looking for fulfillment, divine is fulfillment. And so our journey is to not look for fulfillment in places that it doesn't exist, in places that it's unsustainable, in places that it leaves us with karmic imprints, but to be guided by that karma, which is the law of cause and effect, to our realization about true nature, which is fulfillment as an innate state, which is beyond the thinking mind and feeling body, beyond the ego. And when we hear a lot about transcending the ego, and some people grapple with that and think it's a little bit sort of spiritual bypassing, but we actually still need to have some part of spiritual bypassing so that we can actually realize our true nature is spirit, and we have an ego currently. I have an ego currently, but until we actually start to connect with spirit, it's going to be very difficult. It's like the foundation of reality. And I think that it's an essential part of the process to start to realize our true nature is the formlessness, the timelessness, the boundlessness, and then experience the form and the time sequence that the form is in, which is the body, the mind, and the emotions. So integrating those 4 layers eventually is what it is, I think, in essence, to be a full human, is to have the full experience of physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual. We just have a lot of the world currently yet to realize their true spiritual nature.
That's so beautiful. And we all have ego, right, as human beings. And a lot of the spiritual practice is to letting go of the ego, to removing that, and at least trying to understand how our ego is stopping us from where we wanted to be. I'm curious about your journey, your inner journey. How, at what point you realize, my ego was really stopping me from where I wanted to be or the person I wanted to be? Is there any specific story that you want to share? And
it's not like you get to a point where there's just no ego. I still grapple with the rattling around of that ego inside the vessel that will play up at times and cause discomfort and discord. And, it has its, existence that it's like a cloud in the sky. And sometimes they're thick, dark clouds, and sometimes they're little thin, wispy clouds. And sometimes you can almost not see the cloud, but it's just there very faintly in the sky. And the sky is the divine essence. It's a tonality, it's formlessness. It's just there regardless. And it's there regardless of what type of cloud is in the sky. And so the ego for me many years ago was all that I had. I didn't know anything else, just what I think and what I feel and my physical form. And that's all I knew that there was to Tom, and all the traits and characteristics that come with the ego. I think DeMartini says there's 1,427 characteristics that make up the ego, like Lego building blocks that kind of all create the ego. It's this desire and jealousy and anger and fear and hate and all those sorts of characteristics. What was the big shift for me was when I started to learn a transcending style of meditation. So that is to actually transcend the thinking mind, the feeling body, that's emotions, and the physical body. And this process of transcending in meditation was like, wow, I experienced something in a conscious awareness that wasn't a thought, a feeling, or a physicality. And many of my students, and myself included, would go through this experience in the early stages of meditating in this practice of not knowing where we went, feeling like our body disappearing or our hands disappearing. Many students might say, I felt like my hands disappeared, which is that tactile part of us that we've transcended. And so the early stages of transcending physical, mental, and emotional form, and then experiencing an existence that still prevailed without those 3 layers, was the early stages of going, that was like a light bulb moment. This is also who I am. This is also not, this is only, but this is also who I am. And then the integration over time of that state of loving conscious awareness, divine source, whatever you want to call it, again, the higher self, into the vehicle of the ego, physical, mental, and emotional body, the temporary quality or characteristic of me. And this is a gradual thing that's still ongoing. It's an ongoing process of being less and less identified with the temporary aspects of myself and more identified with the expansive formlessness reality of myself. And so it's almost like the wave slowly becoming more and more realized that it's the ocean. And it's the ocean, whether it's a wave or whether it's not the wave, it's still always the ocean, and starting to become more stabilized in that awareness that it's actually the ocean, not the wave.
Wow, I am processing everything you're saying. So essentially, the healthy state of like our relationship in terms of like our relationship to our ego is not really purely fully let it go, because it's never really gonna happen. If that's a go, it's almost we're setting ourselves up for failure, because it's always gonna be there. And what you're describing is almost like we are making friend with our ego in a way. And you're talking about you're here to guiding people into a better place, less ego attached life. And I'm curious, like what's the tendencies you see in terms of the people making that transition? Like, what are the patterns that they have to actually go through to get to a place where ego started to dissolve? I know you're talking about the meditation. What about if people come to you like, hey, Tom, I don't like meditation. I'm not into mindfulness. I'm curious, like your experiences on how to get to people on that path. The path, once you get on the path, to start to detach yourself to whatever ego tells you to do, and you become lighter, and you become more peaceful, and you embody more loving kindness in yourself. And that's such a good thing that you can feel in your body, all the bodily sensation.
Firstly, we've got to look at the ego, why it's becoming more and more prolific, more and more predominant, and why there's more and more suffering. There's becoming more and more suffering in our world, more anxiety, more depression, more ADHD, more bipolar. All of those things are exacerbations or exaggerations of an ego construct. They're not qualities of the divine. They're not qualities of the higher self. They're not qualities of source or, tonality. They're characteristics of the building blocks of the ego construct. And why we're seeing more and more of them is because we're really self-promoting the ego's existence, particularly with social media. How many likes I've got, how many comments I've got, how many followers I've got, and just the capacity to be seen by so many people in our world today. In the past, before this technological revolution and the invention of social media, how we were seen was maybe when we were speaking in front of a classroom of 30 people, or a group of friends at a dinner party. We were never really seen by people all around the world. I did a post the other day and it's been shared 400,000 times and it's got all these comments. And so what that does is it has this capacity to be seen by a lot more people, which really can petrify the ego or boost the ego in some way, shape or form. We're either afraid of being seen or love being seen, and both at the same time, and just ask any celebrity. And so we're seeing this incredible proliferation of the ego construct because of social media and the capacity to enjoy the delights of being seen more or being afraid of being seen more. So that's firstly a dilemma that we're really facing. It's this huge explosion of the ego on the planet, and that's causing so much discomfort in our world. Now, how do we go beyond that? Well, there's only evolution. Everything is just evolution. Evolution takes on many shapes and forms for it to play out, which is the process of becoming more conscious, more aware. Everything is in the process of becoming more conscious, more aware. As much as we want to put our desires in front of the power of this evolutionary universal force, that it is much bigger than us. And so it will always be there to guide and direct us. And that's why it's causing so much discomfort on the planet, because no, that is not the way. Having more likes is not the way. Putting yourself up on a video so that you can be adored is not the way. And this is, the universe will always bestow upon us karmic influence to help us to be guided. Now, when it comes to experiencing that aspect of ourselves beyond the ego, most of the practices out there won't be of much benefit in that, because most of the practices that are out there are really to satiate the ego still. This is the dilemma, even with spiritual practices, that most spiritual practices are still trying to make the ego feel good, which again is just stabilizing and putting more roots of the ego into the system. And this is not to disparage any particular spiritual practice, and I'm not going to pick any individual ones out. But again, there's a trap that can be, which I myself have been caught in as well, that am I doing this because it makes my ego feel good? Or is it helping me actually liberate myself from the clutches and the ramifications of having the ego and the ego's impression of my life and how it has this insatiable desire to get fulfillment in places that it can't sustain itself. And so what I tend to find is a lot of people have tried many different modalities and practices. And then when they come to me, and they would only come to me because they know that I teach meditation, that style of meditation, transcending meditation. And if what I teach them is that there's no one that can't do it. It's just a matter of whether they're interested in doing it. And to be interested in doing, you have to be prepared to actually start saying, okay, I've explored the outside world as much as I possibly can for fulfillment, and I just can't seem to. Most people come to me, they can't sleep, or they've got anxiety, or they're disenchanted with life. And so we just give them the mantra and help them to go through the process of transcending. And that starts to give them a sense of, because when we transcend, what happens is we liberate ourselves from the ego just in that moment. It's a very powerful process. And so that just gives them a glimpse and a taste of what's possible when that becomes a stabilized experience. But it's not everyone wants to take that path. And so that's totally fine as well. That's why we have many different traditions and many different modalities that people can journey into the realm beyond the ego, and to actually be completely clear of the ego. I think it's a very advanced state that very few people would either want to get into or are in on the planet right now.
Yeah, it's almost like you're talking about revolutionary change. It's almost like the technology is there to push the social media and all the stuff to push us as human beings to evolve in a way. Like, for example, how people's ego can get fed. And then if you're not conscious about it, and you might easily get into very, very depressed and dark period of time. And then you start to really question yourself. And that's actually one side. It could be tremendous amount of suffering that you have to go through. But on the other side, you're actually leveraging that experiences as an opportunity to come to the other side, which is a lighter place, and which is so beautiful. And I'm sensing that as a kind of a collective level. I'm seeing that in myself. I'm seeing that, in my friends around me, and people who got laid off, 12,000 people laid off on Google, and everyone started to question what's going on here, what's going on inside of me, what's my life purpose. And you're talking about social media, and then I wanted to get more of your thoughts on one of the quotes I found on your social media, your Instagram. We are getting closer to a point in time where humanity will no longer be obsessed about a billionaire actor, a designer fashion label, or an influencer who promotes toothpaste. Not there yet, but we're getting closer. I love this so much because I am not that kind of person who get impressed, at least this version of me, like today, this version of Sha. Like, I'm not impressed with how much money you have, what status you got, how many followers you got, how many likes you get on your post. I'm impressed with someone who has been on the inner journey. And because that takes a lot of effort, that takes a lot of courage as well. And so the quote that you wrote, I wonder, like, what triggered you to write that? And what's your take on the evolution of humanity? What does the future looks like from your perspective?
There's a saying, I think it's always darkest before dawn. And I think we're entering into quite a dark time at the moment. As you say, 12,000 people being laid off from Google. And this is going to be something that I think in the next decade, we're going to see potentially a lot of challenging times. We've got major conflict on the horizon, potentially with a number of different countries that have access to some crazy technology. We have AI emerging now, which is not only going to in some way make our life easier in many respects, but also be brutally painful for us in many other respects. And I don't think we really understand the consequences or the capability of what AI might do for us as a species, good or bad. We have a debt bubble that is the most obscene and insane situation that's occurring, that I don't think anyone really understands the potential ramifications of that bubble bursting if it does, which could potentially see a huge major collapse in the entire banking system. It's just not sustainable to keep printing money pretending that the world is an affluent place. It's just like, you can only run up your credit card for so long, right? Until cows come home to roost, chickens come home to roost, whatever the saying is. So we have a lot of things on the horizon that potentially going to be major catalysts for a simplification of life. And what tends to happen in crisis is that we return to core values. It's really interesting when we have crisis in our lives, we tend to return to core values of what really deep down matters most, and connection, love and simplicity, the things that, nature. We tend to find people when they go through quite challenging times, there's a recalibration of their values. And I think that that's what we're going to see at the moment. Our values are, how many properties can I have in my portfolio? How much Bitcoin can I have? How many, Yeezy shoes can I have? And how many followers can I have? And I think we've got a really misaligned sense of value at the moment on the planet. And of course, that evolutionary force, that intelligence that's guiding us, will step in at some point and go, you guys just don't get it. And we need to somehow support you in realizing what is the values of life. And that will be a realignment. And at the moment, there's a big misalignment. So that realignment will always be a healthy and fruitful experience, although it might be very uncomfortable.
You're talking about this discomfort. I think a lot of discomfort in, at least the tech word that I'm in, is people are trying to envisioning a new version of life that they can live in, whether it's grounded into love or compassion, passion, and whatever that could be the core value we're talking about. There's always a fear. There's always a fear that they're going to make a mistake, or they're going to, just transition into a life that leads them into a life that has no stability. Because stability is what we're familiar with, being the corporate word for years, right? And so in terms of like transitioning from the dream to reality, that path, what's your advice, or what is a question you think they should ask when I see the many of the people who are kind of awakening, in that process to get on the right path and not fall back to where they were? Because we can easily carry that fear, carry all the kind of greed into the new road that we think we're getting on. But in reality, for just creating the same metrics, the same system, just in a different version of our life. So, yeah.
What comes to mind is Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And normally what makes us feel safe and secure is having that bottom rung of Maslow's hierarchy, which is, having a house and safety and security. Within that home is the sort of, we have food and we have water and we have shelter. These are the most basic primal necessities. And I get that, it's very hard to not feel safe if you don't have food, clothing, water, and a roof over your head to protect you from the elements or the outside world that might come bearing down on us sometimes. So it's essential that we have some stability with that. And obviously a lot of people going into layoffs, redundancies, AI, then that disrupts that sense of stability and that creates fear. And fear is, it's a separation from the divine quality. So I sometimes suggest, and it's not about just suddenly not having a house to live in and living on the street and having no food and water, but if we can flip Maslow's hierarchy upside down and make the most stable of all things stable in our life, which is the realization of our divine quality, which is, there's nothing more stable than that. Eternality, the formlessness, the non-change of our spiritual entity, our spiritual being, our spiritual existence. Just as the tree grows its roots down first before it grows up, that allows it the stability in storms and tempests. And so having that connection with self, with a capital S, the nature of self, to be self-realized, we have to prioritize that, I think, in this world. I think part of our instability and part of our uncomfortability is because we just haven't realized our true nature. And from that place, then we get to play with the quantum field and get creative about creating that bottom rung of Maslow's hierarchy, which is, your house and your food and your shelter and your water, and being creative to provide sustenance for that space from a self-realized being, from someone that can play with the quantum fields, from someone that can visualize and manifest from the formlessness. I think we need to really, and this is a big part of my work, is to help people realize that the other layers of Maslow's hierarchy will naturally be a better byproduct of your ability to realize you are the quantum field and then play with the quantum field. And, we have a whole calendar year, well, in America and Australia predominantly, not all of the world, but our calendar year is built on a person's life, Jesus's life that, understood those mechanics and could do those things with that quantum field. And now we're starting to mainstream that with the great work of people like Joe Dispenza. And this is some of the work that I do with my clients, my corporate clients and my personal clients, is helping them realize that there's a space of consciousness that they have access to, not in the mind inside the skull, but their field of mind outside the skull. They can start manifesting those things and creating the Maslow's hierarchy in the order that he put it. But I think if we can flip it and put self-realization or self-actualization down into the starting point, then that's going to help people, I think, create better lives regardless of whether they got laid off or not.
Yeah, I love that. I love that so much. Actually, I share the similar view with my parents. Where in China, they're Chinese, I'm Chinese originally. And then what if we go from top down, what if we're spiritually fulfilled and then we build a strong foundation? That means we have a strong foundation. So whatever decision we make, whatever communication we have, it's coming from a place of fullness of like love, compassion, all that stuff. And not from a place of like, I need to feel the void inside of me. And that always got pushed back from my parents, apparently, So I almost sometimes feel like I'm fighting a spiritual war in a way, like trying to get people on the other side. But then that's also my ego, like this is my way to do it. And I guess there's a timing for everyone to get on their own journey. I guess next question for you, what do you think makes us human? We're talking about humans' needs, but I think even before that, what makes us a human being, or what makes you a human being?
Such a fascinating question. I think, if we ask that with the microphone in the mainstream streets of the world, you get some phenomenally different answers. And I think, from my perspective, firstly, I see humans having 4 layers: physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual. These are the 4 layers of denseness, from most dense physical, then emotional, then mental, and then spiritual. It's almost like water has the capacity to express itself as ice, the most dense, then liquid water, then steam, and then eventually vapor, which you can't see or touch. And so the dilemma we have for us as humans is that we tend to gravitate to the densest and most obvious aspects of life, which is why we would rather find fulfillment in ice cream or new dress or new shoes than in the transcendence of meditation, because it's more quantifiable, more tangible, more obvious in the world of form. And we've got to recognize on the macro perspective that we're currently in Kali Yuga, which is a long epoch of time. This is a Vedic perspective that identifies that there are long windows of time in the existence on the planet. And the one that we're currently in, and ideally coming towards the end of, I think the mere fact that we're having this conversation on a Zoom call and you're in California and I'm in New South Wales, Australia, says a lot about where we're at in the cycle of coming towards the end of this epoch of time, this eon of time called Kali, the Age of Ignorance Yuga. And why we're so concerned and obsessed with the world of form and less in the world of formlessness, which is spirit, is simply because that collective time that we're in, that's what we're conditioned and coded to do. We see ads on TV, we see ads on our social media, we watch Netflix series, and really that's an indoctrination time and time again that getting forms in our life, cars, houses, people, pot plants, make us feel happy. And we're coming to a period of time where that exhaustion of the accumulation and consumption of those things and the realization that it still didn't lead us to happiness. Like some of the most affluent countries in the world, i.e. USA, have some of the deepest levels of depression and anxiety as well, and the medication, because there's this insatiable appetite to acquire, to experience, to attain, and yet it still can't provide the fulfillment. And that's what it was for me as well. It's the journey that we go on. And then after trying to exhaust fulfillment from the world of form, we then start to go, well, maybe it wasn't there. And I remember being curled up in a ball on a holiday on a bed in a resort that I was in. One of the most beautiful locations in Australia. It was my favorite place, Byron Bay. I was having a holiday as a broker. And I remember being curled up in a ball in immense depression and anxiety. I was having a huge panic attack. And I was trying to validate why I shouldn't be feeling this way. And I remember counting all these things on my fingers, all the good things in my life. I had all these incredible levels of affluence and wealth and beautiful family, and everything in my life was literally every box could be ticked. I'd acquired everything that the code of life had told me that I needed to acquire. There was nothing more I could possibly want. My parents didn't get divorced. I wasn't abused. I wasn't part of an alcoholic family. I had a great partner. I had a great work. I had lots of money. I had great cars. I was in beautiful houses. And yet I was in abject misery and anxiety. And so it was the universe's way of saying, dude, it's just not there. You've got to go within. You're just not looking in the right place for it. And of course, it might have been, I can't remember how many months after that I eventually found meditation. But I think to be human is to realize the fullness of what it is to be human, physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual, and live and breathe in that way.
Oh, wow. That's so beautiful. This is a new answer. I've been asking this question to every single guest, and I think this is a very, very different answer from other guests, which I'm not surprised to hear that from you, given, what I've been following you on your Instagram too. It's funny enough, you're talking about how, people should not focus on the followers and but you do have a lot of followers. I guess my takeaway is don't even worry about how many followers you have. Like, do your own work, and people tend to follow you, and then that's because there's a light in you that's attracting those people. But don't put so much focus on, oh, I need to gain 1 million followers, so I need to strategize to get to that. And the reverse way can really make people miserable, because if you don't get there and you're going to start to question yourself, am I doing the right thing? Maybe I'm just not good enough, and can easily feel depressed. That's my take, but curious about your thoughts on this, like this dilemma of what I wanted to achieve, and then I need to strategize a way to get to where I wanted to be versus embodiment, embody this whole spirit. And what you're talking about, what makes us human beings really to experience every single thing and sensations or whatever that makes us a human being. Did I make myself clear?
Yeah. Yeah. It comes back to your question about, what is success? And I think this is the challenge from an ego's perspective. Success is something we actually can never get there. It's one of those things like trying to find the pot of gold under the rainbow. It just keeps moving away from you every time you get close to it. Mm. And I remember having dinner this is before we had social media with followers. It was when we had emails and email databases. And I remember having dinner with a very big, I don't know if you call them influencer. I guess it was Glenn Ledwell from Mind Movies and Natalie Ledwell from Mind Movies. And they had a huge following, 1.5 million email database, and a very big business in helping people understand how to create a mind movie to manifest your life. Beautiful people, lovely couple. And I remember talking to them about their database. At that time I had like 50,000 in my email database, and they had 1.5 million. And I said, wow, it must be amazing having 1.5 million in your database. It's just phenomenal. And that time it was huge. And they said, oh no, 1.5 million is, it's nothing. We want to, we're not even close to where we want to be. We want to get to 5 and 10 million. And it made me realize that you never get to the point that you want to get to. The goalpost keeps moving. And you might get to 5 million, then you go far out. We don't have 15 million, and this company has 15 million. So we need to go further. We need to do more. And I think in the field of relativity, we never really can fully satiate the ego, because it is one of the characteristics of the ego is it's insatiable. It hasn't got the capacity to be satiated. It will always seek and desire more. And so for me, there's my ego still grapples with it. There's 70,000 Instagram. It's nothing. It's like, I look at Peter Crone, or then I look at Joe Dispenza, and then it's just by default, we're always going to compare. We can't help but compare. And you're always going to want to strive for more. I don't necessarily think it's a bad thing. I think it's a matter of whether it's causing discomfort, or whether it's causing misery, or whether it's causing a sense of identification. Then that's when it becomes a problem. If your social media at high school isn't as big as another girl or another guy that's got a bigger social media, and your identity is built on that, then that's different. But from a business perspective, it's different. From a business perspective, it would be better if our business had 500,000 followers, because then we could potentially transform more lives. Mm-hmm. So I think it's really coming from the intention behind that, I guess, longing or desire or inclination or want to have more, and what's the outcome of that.
I think it's just being honest with ourselves on what is the intention for us to want more, and is it out of greed, the comparison, and then also like how it's affecting our life right now, right? Is it causing depression, or it's causing certain emotions that just makes us feel like we're not ourselves anymore, or it's actually helping us to impact the world in a positive way? And one last question for people who are on the journey of going inward, or simply maybe people just get laid off, or people are still fighting within themselves, or fighting depression in the corporate world and trying to figure out what's next for me, what's the life purpose for me, how do I even define success? I know there's a different kind of modalities, value work that can all go, but I think one good question can really help them get to the next mile. What is the one question you would recommend or encourage them to ask themselves and be really honest with themselves?
The thing that comes to mind is, who am I? Am I my job? Am I my bank account? Am I my Bitcoin portfolio? Am I my followers? Who am I? And this is a really probing question. And most of us create an identity based upon relativity, that is the world outside of us, the family that we have, the school we went to, the job that we have, the salary that we have. And I think the thing that we have to start really probing deeper into is, who am I? And there's a great book by Niska Dada, his name, I think and the book's called I Am That. And it's about, the first question is, who am I? And then the realization is that I am that, the soul within. And how we discover that, how we become aware of that is the next question. It's one thing to intellectualize that as a concept and read a book and says, oh yeah, I am that. But I think we need to have a daily modality, a daily practice, whether it's, again, coming back to whatever practice is going to serve you, that enables you to connect deeper to some part of you that's not a thinking mind or feeling body. And for me, that's maybe called transcendental meditation. For others, will find it might be plant medicine, it might be breath work, it might be, being in a monastery and doing mindfulness. There's so many different ways that we can start to explore that inner being, that inner quality, that inner nature. And then from there, make that the foundation of our action and go into the world in action. Don't just sit in that chair and keep your eyes closed and hope the world's going to get better. Take from that place and start to build and construct a beautiful life from that.
This is, to me, it's almost like an encouragement or call for a new exploration, and say goodbye to the older way of doing things. We're connecting with the people and connecting to ourselves. And I think it's so beautiful. What's the last word you wanted to say to any audience who might be watching this? Simple blessing, whatever that comes to your mind, and whatever intuition feel like you need to get that word out to the audience.
Yeah, we constantly go through challenging times, and no matter how seemingly enlightened we are, you'll still face some sort of change or challenge. And what helped me as I go along through that process of going through these crises or challenges is that knowing that there's a deeply supporting maternal force of energy that is actually behind that experience, and that when we're in a challenging situation, don't curl up in a ball and go, I can't believe this is happening to me. How can this be happening to me? More like, look at that and go, how is this supporting me? How is this in some way, shape or form guiding me? How is this in some way, shape or form improving my life? Because that is evolution. It is improving. And sometimes we don't realize that the way that's unfolding might not be how we hoped for or expected, but then maybe that's just what's needed. And I've always found, no matter what, after all of my challenging times that I've been through, as long as I'm open and adaptive and have my practice and continue to, be inspired by spirit to guide me forward, that things continually will improve after each crisis.
Yeah, I love that. Oh, well, thank you so much for your time, Tom. Conversation with you is always a gift, because that did kind of get me to think about things differently. And then I do feel the energy too will stay connected.
Absolutely. Thanks for joining in, everyone. It's great to share space with you. And thanks, Shah, for such great questions and being a great host.
Thank you. Thanks for listening. If you're a conscious leader in tech, sales, and beyond, check out my free Soul Scientist community at shahharli.com/community. Sign up if you resonate with the message. And if you enjoy the show, don't forget to subscribe and share the show with your colleagues and friends. I'll see you next week.